Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners and welcome back to Nighttime. Tonight we're going to revisit a case that was featured on the show last week. A case that, even after the passage of 60 years, continues to echo with mystery, shock, and unanswered questions. In that episode, we heard how in May of 1962, a 23-year-old nurse named Alexandra Wiwcharuk vanished while out for a walk along the South Saskatchewan River in Saskatoon. Days later, Alexandra's body was found in a shallow grave just blocks from her home. She'd been beaten, assaulted, and buried alive. Her murder shocked the community, and the investigation that followed was intense. Yet despite the efforts of police, friends, and the public, her killer was never found, and the case eventually went cold. But Alexandra's story didn't end there. Decades later, acclaimed Canadian author Sharon Butula, who went to school with Alexandra, found herself drawn to the case. The result of her interest was both the book, The Girl in Saskatoon, and a renewed interest and reinvestigation into Alexandra's murder. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, Sharon is going to join us to again revisit Alexandra's life, the legacy her murder left behind, and the trials and tribulations of writing a book that quite literally kicked the hornet's nest that formed on the cold case. So let's get into it. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Sharon Butala to discuss the murder of Alexandra Wiwcharuk.
Something about this crime gets under people's skin. The victim seems to speak to people from her grave. The author, Sharon Butala, became convinced of it.
I really felt that she was saying to me, they stole this from me and I want justice, I hate to say this, it's so corny, but, I want vengeance. I want to rest easy, kind of. It was having her life stolen from her that she, in this moment, seemed to say to me was the great crime.
The voice just wouldn't go away, and soon the author found herself preoccupied by memories of Alexandra. The outcome earlier this year, a book, The Girl in Saskatoon.
Sharon, before we begin, why don't you tell me a little bit about you, who you are, give me some background on your career, and of course let me know what connects you to Alexandra's story.
Well, my name is Sharon Butala, and I'm a writer, and I have been for almost 50 years now, although I didn't publish my first book until I was 44, and those numbers aren't going to work because I'm not 94, I'm 84. Anyway, I've published 22 books, both fiction and nonfiction. I've won some prizes. I have never made a fortune, and I'm not very famous. I was born and lived most of my life here in Saskatchewan. When I was 13, my family moved down from the bush along the boreal forest to Saskatoon, and I've thought of Saskatoon as my hometown ever since. And I did go to school with Alexandra Wiwcharuk, high school that is, and she had arrived in Saskatoon for the first time to start, I guess it was grade 9, and she came from an area very much like the kind of place I came from. And she was a 100% Ukrainian-Canadian girl in that she spoke the language, attended Orthodox church, had all the virtues of young Ukrainian women in those days who were competent and capable in every way, and she was very bright. But the important thing, I guess, for the story that I told in the book was that she grew up to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you and I have connected as a result of your book, The Girl in Saskatoon, which was about Alexandra's life and death. Long before the book, as you just mentioned, you've been connected to her. This is not something where you just chose a local story and decided to write a book about it. Tell me a little bit more about how you knew Alexandra. Like you were in school together, but my understanding was you were also like I think in a drama group or a drama club together. I know this has been many years since then, but do you still have specific memories of it?
Yes, we were in a drama club together for a couple of years, where she was winning best actress awards. It was a fairly big event the night that we put on 3 one-act plays, and we had an external dramaturge come in, and they were the ones who chose Alex as the best actress, whereas I was, people just said nice things about me. They didn't say I could act.
She'll be a writer.
Yeah, you should be a writer. I wish somebody had said that to me then. It would have spared me a lot of other kinds of trouble. Anyway, and we were also in choir together, and I don't know why she was doing it, but I was doing it because I wasn't good at sports or anything like that, and you could get a half a credit toward your grade 12 graduation. If you did some of these other activities. So to fill out your playbook, kind of, you picked one, and choir was it. I couldn't sing either. I don't know if Alex could or not. We were just in the chorus.
Now, with Alexandra, I don't know if you could talk about this, but I know her ambition in life. One of the things she wanted to do was to become a stewardess, which seems like when you think of present day, I don't think there's a lot of young women who are pursuing a career as like a flight attendant. But I think back when this story took place, does that surprise you to hear that she was pursuing that as a career, or would that have been something that a young woman would have sought out as an opportunity?
It was a little bit like saying, I want to be an astronaut, or I'm going to be an astronaut, or that I'm going to go to Hollywood and be a movie star. It was, the rules in those days were ridiculous, very 50s. We're talking about 1954 to 1958. And in the early days of the industry, the flight attendants were all girls. I say girls because that's how they were treated. They weren't treated as women. They had to be attractive physically. They had to stay slim. And in the very early days, they had to be nurses, graduate nurses.
Oh, my understanding was Alexandra, it turned out she wasn't eligible for the job because of her height. Like she was short or below average height?
Yeah, she was, I think, 5'2", something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I just can't imagine a world where, like, we're now to turn away. Like, you would need the specific looks. You need to stay thin. You're not tall enough to be a stewardess here. I've also heard from someone online who was writing in response to the episode I had done about Alexandra's life and death, and they had told me that their mother was a stewardess, but she had to leave the job or leave the profession when she got married because I don't know if it was some airlines or what, but you also couldn't be married working that job. So a lot has changed.
No, I'd forgotten that. And, I can't remember the part about her not being tall enough. I don't remember that being a requirement, but that could be just it's been a long time since that book was published, 17 years, and that's one of many, many details I'd have to hold in my head. I had always, I suggest in the book, and nobody said, oh, you're crazy to me, including none of the Wiwcharuk family members, that she knew by the time she left to do nursing training, that she was a very attractive young woman. Requirement number one. And number two, she was in nursing school, which may not have been only because it was more or less free. It may have also been because she had decided that she wanted to be a stewardess, and to be a stewardess she had to be a registered nurse.
Oh, interesting.
Or a graduate nurse. The RN I don't know about because she never did get that. And what was the other requirement? Oh, yes, but I think that it might have been seen between winning beauty competitions and working as a stewardess, you might open up opportunities in your life that you would never get otherwise. You would marry some guy and settle down and have babies. And that would be it. Your dreams out the window. unless that was your dream. And it's pretty clear it wasn't Alex's dream.
Certainly.
Other than that, I was thinking, she proved she could act. She was very good looking. She may have had dreams of a career as an actress.
And that kind of would make sense. So I'd like to hear a bit about these beauty contests. I know she's won a lot of like local kind of small town beauty contests. That's something now where if you think of that sort of thing, I would think of a beauty pageant with like little kids kind of like dressed up in fancy dresses with lots of makeup being put on display. But I have a feeling what was going on in this area in the 1950s was probably different than anything that exists today. Can you tell me anything about these kind of beauty competitions, just so I can get an idea of what this would have been like?
I really didn't pursue the study of beauty competitions in the 50s, really beyond a very superficial level.
Yeah, okay.
I would say that the demands in terms of polish and accomplishments and so on and so forth were just virtually not there in those days. It was enough that you be pretty and pleasant and that you could speak reasonably well if asked questions.
Maybe I'm picturing something like the Saskatchewan version of like a Miss America competition, like as kind of the smaller town version of that or something perhaps. But through our talk here, it's clear that we're talking about something that happened a whole lot of time ago, and a lot has happened with your life since then, of course, to make a lot of these memories a little fuzzy and foggy. But do you recall learning about her death?
Oh, certainly. And what happened was she disappeared on the 18th of May, and her body was not found or not reported as found until, I believe it was May 31st, 1962, 9 o'clock or 9:30 at night, when the father and uncle of these children who had found her by the hand sticking up out of the dirt, he had taken them home, and then he called the police. So say it was around 9:30, it would have taken a bit of time for them to gather whatever was needed and get there and clean out get the dirt off her body. So the following day, I got up, the newspaper arrived, and there was the photo, black and white, of course, of these tall men in kind of trench coaty things standing over the open grave, which you could not see into, and had been taken with lights because her body was finally... I started to read the account, and I had just been married. I don't think I'd been married a full year then, and I said to my husband, I knew her. I couldn't believe it. Nothing had ever happened to me in my whole life of interest. I had never been peripheral to any event of any importance that I knew of, and I would have been 22. Alex had already turned 23. And it just was so astounding to me, first of all, that this had happened, and secondly, that I actually knew that body in the grave, that I'd been in high school with her all those years. A hard thing to deal with.
Of course, she was, as you had already mentioned, there was a period of time where she was missing and unaccounted for up until prior to the point that they found her in the shallow grave on the riverbank. Do you recall being aware that she was missing and that there was a search ongoing, or is your first memory of actually seeing the newspaper and seeing her body being discovered?
I believe that I had seen a small notice in the newspaper that she was missing, and I had paid virtually no attention to it. When you're newly married and life is so thrilling and you're head over heels in love, that a girl you didn't really know very well, with whom you'd been in high school and hadn't seen once since, had disappeared, it wouldn't really seem that big a deal to you. When I saw that she had been murdered, that was one of those things you never forget.
we can jump forward a little bit in time here, because what I'm really interested in learning is what led you to pursue Alexandra's story for the topic of a book. Because when I look at your writing career, it's not like you're a writer of crime novels. From my point of view, it seems like Alexandra's story would be kind of off topic for the sort of books you were writing. Maybe tell me about what you were writing and what led you to think, I should write about Alexandra.
Well, I had my second marriage was to a cattle rancher where I down in the southwest corner of the province. The bottom of the ranch was 10 miles from the Montana border and about 30 from Alberta. And I only knew what was going on in Saskatoon because my family still lived here, and I would go back and forth all the time. And I had been writing, most of my books were about the cattle ranching community in southwestern Saskatchewan, which was a brand new thing to me and to most of the rest of the province. Most people didn't even know that this place existed, and it was just stunningly interesting to me. So I've been writing books about it, and I had just finished some book. I don't even remember what it was, and I remember thinking, well, I need a new subject, and it would be nice to go back to the place I think of as my hometown, to claim myself as one of the early residents of the city. 1953. I mean, the city was originated, I think, 1882 or 3. So anyway, and then I started to think about if there was anything interesting in Saskatoon that I actually had a connection to that might make a good book. And the first thing I thought of course, was Alex's murder. This is the first thing that came to mind. And so, 1998, I was in Saskatoon, and that was when I first started to ask questions. And it was 10 years before the book was published. Wow. People would meet me on the street in Saskatoon, as the years passed, and they would say, "Is the book finished yet?" Everybody wanted that book because they wanted to know the same things I wanted to know, which had never been made clear to the public. What happened to her? How did this happen? And the crime had never been solved, so people didn't even know what had really happened that night. As the years passed, and there was very little after that in the newspapers about the case. It was like it felt kind of forgotten, I think, to people of the city. And it was something nobody in the city ever forgot. And as I started asking questions and talking to people we'd both been in high school with, and her family and so on, I began to realize that it was part of the history of the city, the kind of unwritten history, that everyone was fascinated by that beautiful young girl who was a nurse and was murdered, and her killer was never caught. And that fact that people couldn't get over that, couldn't forget it, became something I thought I could write about. It was within the range of the kind of writing I did, whereas solving a crime was not something I knew the first thing about, I never thought I would solve the crime. That had never been my aim. But everybody thought it was. And they were very curious. So I don't know what else I can say about that.
Yeah.
I just made up my mind I would write a book about it. And it became a nonfiction book rather than a novel.
Okay, all right. You say like asking questions and getting to know people. Well, I think what you've done, like looking at it now from my point of view, is you really like blew this thing wide open, because when you go through the timeline from the point that she's murdered, there is initial like attention and investigation, but the case goes cold. And at the point that you begin pursuing her story as a topic for a book, it was largely a nearly forgotten dark spot on Saskatoon's history. But you begin asking questions and some would say kicking the hornet's nest because, again, looking back in hindsight, a lot of things are set in motion right around the time that you begin pursuing her story. And one thing is, some of the people that you're meeting with are either current or retired law enforcement officers. And it seems like, thanks to your interest in the story, I don't know if I can give you full credit for it, but some of the people that you're questioning associated with law enforcement would go on to get a greater interest in her story, and from there would go on to file complaints about the handling of her case and cold cases in general in Saskatoon. And from there, a cold case unit would be formed. So it's very easy to draw a line from the author getting interested in the story, the police getting reinterested in the story, a cold case unit being formed, and a new investigation, almost 40 years later, beginning. Like, am I making too far of a stretch to say that you may have played some role within that happening?
Well, I doubt it. I mean, I never knew that they hadn't always had it to this moment. You're just telling me that they hadn't had a cold case unit up till then. Although, when I was in somewhere, I was in cold case files, but I think that was with the Mounties. There had been a serial killer who had killed young Native women who were in the sex trade, and this was prior to Alex, the reinvigorated investigation of Alex's case, because I remember seeing these boxes with names and case notes and stuff written on the outside of them in this RCMP office, and those cases were there. So I just assumed they'd always had a cold case unit. The reinvigorated interest in it when I started asking questions and people started calling me to tell me what they knew, and word kind of spread for people who had been alive and living in Saskatoon in 1962. Probably did. And I did call the police a number of times for information, but I didn't really get anything of any use to me from them, because until the murder is solved, I was told, the file, the police file, is not available to anyone but the police. And of course, it's been 63 years since her murder. The case remains unsolved, and I have a feeling if I were a big guy among all those men, I might have had better luck getting information from the police. But as a little woman in her 60s, they didn't really feel very, very scared of me, didn't feel they had to give me any information, although they did try to make me think I was getting information and that they were being helpful.
Oh, really? Tell me about that. Like, what are your memories of dealing with law enforcement while writing The Girl in Saskatoon?
Well, I gave up after a while. It was completely useless. I did get some help, though, from people in law, like more in justice, although they weren't necessarily. I don't know how they ranked the way the province's government is laid out, but they were not police officers, but they were very concerned with what went on in law enforcement in the province. And one of them told me that I needed to file a Freedom of Information request, which I did do, but it was turned down because the person I wanted to know what was in that document that you mentioned earlier in this conversation about the police officer who, I guess he registered a complaint or something about the way the case had been handled. He was a young officer himself at the time, and I wanted to see that complaint, and that's what I applied through Freedom of Information for, and I was not allowed to see it on the grounds that the people involved were still alive.
Okay.
And that's all I can remember.
Yeah, I have a feeling the police would have plenty of reasons why they didn't want the writer to get access to the complaint that the police officer was filing against the police. But that was the reason they had given. But regardless, like when I look at everything that has happened around the time you're researching and eventually releasing the book, a lot happens with the investigation, including, like I mentioned, people actually being assigned to reinvestigate it as a cold case, and that is what will lead to the exhumation of Alexandra's remains. It would lead to new evidence being found in the form of DNA evidence on hair that were found on her after the exhumation of her remains. It also leads to some DNA testing that will go on to rule out some previously considered suspects. So a lot of important stuff is pushed forward during your time, again, kicking the hornet's nest. For someone who looks at Alexandra's story now, there's a lot written about it, including your book, but many articles. There's, I think, two pretty major television specials. One of them is the CBC Fifth Estate documentary, which your work as a writer is also pivotal to making the CBC's Fifth Estate documentary come to life. Can you tell me what you remember about kind of the odd circumstances and the coincidences that will lead to Alexandra's story being featured on CBC?
Oh, sure. See, people kept warning me that I don't know. There were some sort of oblique death threats. They oblique only in the sense that they weren't given directly to me. They were given to journalists or the police or something to tell me that I should quit because I would be killed. That the killer was still the killer or killers with an F was still alive. And this was, I'm 5 hours. I was at that time living on the ranch, 5 hours from Saskatoon by car in a really remote region of Canada, aside from the big white north. And so when I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from someone who was a police officer who was, I think he'd been put on leave and was under some kinds of problems from his superiors in the Saskatoon police at the time, and he started talking to me. According to him, his phone was tapped, and he said his mail was being stopped and searched and then put back in the mailbox, sort of thing. So I began to be afraid. I was standing up. My husband was asleep in the bedroom, and I was standing up down the hall in my office in my nightgown, A, freezing, and B, shaking because I felt I had fallen into something that was way scarier than I had bargained for.
Where were these, like, either threats or intimidation? Where was it coming from? Like, just because as you're telling me this, I'm thinking, was she getting too close to the answer and people were trying to scare her off? Where do you think this was coming from?
On one case, when I was followed out of the city and I did a bunch of dipsy doodling around to see if I was imagining things, but always a police car would show up behind me. And I was driving out of the highway, and of course my thought was, how did they know I was leaving town today? How did they know I was taking this route? But they thought that I was trying to solve the crime too, and all I was trying to do was find out what had happened that night when she disappeared, or so I told people, but they didn't believe me. But I knew I couldn't solve the crime. It would be an accident if I did, I thought. What happened was that was about 2002, I think, and I was about to be given the Order of Canada, which is kind of like astonishing. I mean, I was nobody in the middle of nowhere, and it was only because, well, I don't actually know why, but it was at least in part because my husband and I made the donation, a significant donation to the Nature Conservancy of Canada when we made the big deal with them and the provincial government was involved, and also because I had written a bunch of books about the people of the area, which had not been done since Wallace Stegner had lived in East End and written, I think something like 2.5 books about the area in his era, and he was much older than I am.
Yeah, but the order, you say, I don't know why I got to get the Order of Canada to be granted, that is no small feat. It's the second highest honor that the Canadian honor system has, and it recognizes outstanding achievement, dedication to the community, and service to the nation. So congratulations to receive that. I've never met or spoke to anyone who is an officer of the Order of Canada. So first of all, I'm glad that you're even giving me any of your time. But when you become an officer of the Order of Canada, you have the opportunity to meet the Governor General of Canada, because that's who presents the designation.
I was informed that I was going to receive the Order of Canada, and it was going to be held in Winnipeg that year in the government building, the legislative building, with its wonderful, huge bison and, anyway, bronze bison inside the building. Astonishing to me was that I was seated on Adrian Clarkson's left, little old me, and across the table from us were 3 either former or current Manitoba premiers. Anyway.
But if you're in that position and you want to advocate for a missing person or an unsolved crime, you have kind of the golden opportunity, because you have the ear of a lot of people. And with the Governor General, not only is that an important position, but she's an ex-CBC employee.
Exactly, and she worked with Lyndon McIntyre, and she said to me, "That sounds like a really interesting story. Why don't you call Lyndon McIntyre?" So,
sorry to interrupt you. Just interrupt you for 1 sec. Do you recall, like, what led to you and the Governor General? I'm just thinking, if you're sitting there in that position, receiving the Order of Canada, it's not for the book that you're in the process of writing. So something led to you telling the Governor General about Alexandra's story, because you were receiving it based on completely separate achievements and work you've done. So do you recall, like, what led you to be like, there's this story that I'm working on now, and because it does seem like a pretty dark story to bring up at this function.
Yeah, I think I just realized at some point I felt so completely out of place there. And I just felt that at some point, of course, it was my duty to introduce a subject for conversation. The standard thing at a dinner like this is first you talk to the person on your left, and then you talk to the person on your right. So there was a lull in the conversation, and so I started telling her what had happened, and that I was kind of at a loss as to what to do next, and that I had become afraid to keep on going on my own. There were other incidents that we haven't even discussed that had happened that scared the wits out of me when you put them all together. And she said, she listened with interest, and it was not feigned interest. She was genuinely interested. And then she said, "That sounds like," the journalist came out. She said, "That sounds like a good story. Why don't you call Lyndon McIntyre?" So after this was all over and I went home, I phoned the Fifth Estate and says she, I do have my devious ways. I said, the Governor General told me that I should call Lyndon McIntyre and I'd like to speak to him about a particular story, and that got me right in.
Wow.
Not instantly, but he called me very quickly after that, which might have been like the next day or something, I don't remember. And he was very interested. And then, the story gets passed on to producers and so on and so forth. So that was a pretty exciting time in my life.
At this point in your life, are you able to, do you have any theory, or do you have any idea of what could have happened or what maybe definitely didn't happen? Like, where does your mind go when you try to explain that night?
Well, I know that one of the big questions, which remains to this day, was she killed by more than one man? Like three is usually what people think. 3 young men, or was there only one killer? I, after it's been, since the book was published, 17 years, and I've had a lot of thinking to do, and thinking of how it might have happened, that is the murder, the rape, the blow to her face that broke her nose and actually smashed her sinuses into her head, and then the crack, the huge blow to the back of her head. Could one man have done all those things? And the answer is, when you think about it, he certainly could have. It didn't need to be 3 men. And so then Alex's 4 nieces, who were children when she was killed, but who had clear memories of her and loving memories, became, as everyone knows, very involved. We actually had a meeting in Calgary at my at the apartment I was renting when I first moved there after my husband died. I loved them. I thought they were wonderful women, intelligent and commonsensical, and And we worked together for a little while, maybe a year or more. I have trouble remembering exactly. Offering ideas to each other and passing information to each other. And then that kind of, after my book was published especially, it kind of dwindled and died away. But it's been a few years since I last spoke with Patty Story, who was kind of leading the sisters. My second point is that these women, they just dived in, and they traveled, I swear, all over Canada, and I believe they made forays into the United States. I don't know where else they went, because we stopped keeping in touch. And they found out more about the Saskatoon I grew up in and the kids I went to school with than I'd ever known. But it seemed to me, you know what they always say about murders, you don't want to stray too far from the first 24 to 72 hours, and the place where the murder took place. You look for opportunity, you look for who was around, and so on. And it seemed to me, as I spoke to them occasionally and heard them being interviewed, they moved so far away and gathered this massive information that I just said to myself, no, let's listen to the people who are experienced in this. And I went right back to the people I knew about that night and the rumors. And I concluded, because one of the many people the police had on their roster, which I've never seen, but I know by implication a number of people who might have been guilty of the crime, I thought to myself, one of these guys did it, or 2 or 3 of them, and I think that the police laid out some red herrings, so the public wouldn't mix in and mess up their case. I knew of one who was utterly dysfunctional. Well, rather dysfunctional would be more fair. And I thought, wow, is he the guy? Not one iota of proof. It was speculation, but it wasn't speculation based on stupidity. It was speculation based on something that made a kind of sense that would never work in a law court, of course. So I've never told anyone who it was, who I had in mind, but I'm, that's the best I can do. And I've been on this case for a long time now. I did feel, and I do continue to feel, that Alex did not get justice, and that part of a major part of my reason for writing the book as I got into it was to say and how tragic it was that this beautiful young woman who was so clever and such a wonderful personality received no justice at this terrible death. And, she died of asphyxiation. She didn't die of all these blows or of being raped.
That's horrific. It's worse than a nightmare.
Yeah. And she was destroyed, of course. I don't know if plastic surgeons could ever have brought back. They could have made her live, but could they have brought back that beauty she had? And it was just all so wrong. And the thing was, every single person who had anything to do in law enforcement or justice with her murder and the investigation was a man. Right from day one. The police even chased away the young reporter who was sent. She came and spoke to me after reading, I think, in Vancouver. They chased her away because she was a young woman, even though this was her job. And the editor had sent her to get photos. They wouldn't let her even see it. And the editor had to send a man, which tells you something about what that era was like. And another woman came to me who said, I was one of those kids who found her hand. And the newspaper said it was my cousin or something like that. And it wasn't. It was me. She was a girl.
They wanted to feature a boy. Yeah.
Yeah, and the only one of that whole business, including the coroner's inquest jury, who was a woman, was the one who took the minutes at the coroner's inquest. But it seemed to me that was part of the story. That was part of the ethos of the time, that nice girls didn't get murdered. They didn't get raped, which is just total baloney, but that was the thought at the time.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there being rumors, what are kind of like, as you were going through the research of the book and learning about Alexandra's story, what do you recall being some of the more commonly discussed rumors as to what may have happened? Because when I think of the circumstances of her death and where she was and where she was found, it would seem to me that it would have to have been someone who was on the water that night, either walking by or hanging out waiting for someone. But it just strikes me as something that must be connected to the riverside that she was walking on.
Oh, well, certainly the police thought that, and they did pursue. See, Alex was found with a hank of hair in her shoe that wasn't her hair because she was black-haired. And this hair apparently had a reddish tinge to it, and one of the boys sitting on the weir fishing while Alex was sitting there watching the river go by was a redhead, even though he was only like 15 or 16 years old at the time. And he was pursued up until the DNA came along, and it was proven that he did not do it. That's one example. There was this thing about somebody in a little red sports car, and everybody was pretty convinced that he must be the guy. And there was the Fifth Estate were the ones who found out that there at that time had been only 2 of that particular little red sports car registered in the province. So that kind of narrowed it down immediately. But the young man who owned one of those cars had anglicized his name, and it had come out the same surname as a rather prominent family in the city. And so everybody latched on that. He had to be the killer. He had a bit of a reputation for chasing girls and one thing and another, and there was some history from family about a young guy who kept asking her to go out, and she wouldn't go out with them, and it was related to the red sports car. And so the whole city apparently thought he was the guy who had killed her. And he finally, eventually, he did not kill her. He was absolutely innocent. And he had moved out of Saskatoon, married, and had children and all the rest. But when, wasn't me, I've never met him, but it might have been the sisters, the nieces, met and spoke to him, and he was angry, and he said it had ruined his life.
Wow.
Although obviously it hadn't ruined his life, it had changed his life.
Yeah.
So. And that was one rumor. There was all kinds of secrecy among those people who knew something. They wouldn't talk to anyone about what they knew, and that made everybody think that they were right in thinking there was some skullduggery going on concerning what the police knew. And I discovered through research that this is a commonplace, that when someone is killed and no killer can be found, then all the people say, oh, well, it's because it was son or sons of prominent men, and the police are protecting them, which, is often a silly thing to think.
Yeah, and I guess if you don't have any information, and in the vacuum of information, it's easy to stick conspiracy like that, and that's why conspiracy thrives in so many stories like this. But like I said, given the passage of time and everything that has been done so far, what do you expect, or do you have hope that this is something that will be solved during your lifetime? Do you think that there is the possibility?
No, I even spoke to a deputy minister of justice in the province and said, shouldn't there be an inquiry? And I got back this emphatic, there will never be an inquiry sort of response. It's just that after 63 years and this undying interest in the people of the city, that nobody who knows anything will say a word. It just seems so unlikely.
And also so many people close to the story, of course, aren't with us anymore.
That's very true. The police officers who were the investigators, the tall men standing there, they were obviously senior officers because they weren't in uniforms, standing there looking down at her remains in the grave, are all dead. And even the wonderful police officers who were retired and had been young cops on the beat when Alex was killed, and who helped me a great deal, are dead now. Or at least the one who helped me the most is dead.
And same goes for probably a lot of the people who would have been on the water that day.
Yeah, in fact, the young man with the red hair, who was interviewed by the police repeatedly over the years, is dead. I don't know about the others because I was kind of relieved once the book came out. And still, I believe I was in Yellowknife, and people came to hear my reading, and someone wanted to tell me his theory. He'd been in Saskatoon, and that happened all over the country, at least all over the West. People who'd been in Saskatoon at that time and had their own theories and information. And usually the information was not right, as far as I knew, which threw their theories into the garbage, unfortunately. And they were people who'd worried for many years about it. And in one place, one of the men who was touted as her boyfriend, who in fact had not been at the time when she was killed, but was just one of the men she dated, came to my reading and seemed very upset. He came with his wife, seemed really upset through the reading, and he finally got up. It was in a bookstore. He finally got up and walked around, and he didn't leave, but he walked around in the bookstore, and he looked troubled, and I just, I did go to him and say, I know who you are. Why don't you tell me the truth? And, or why don't you tell me what you know? And I couldn't bring myself to do it. That's why I'm not that great an investigator because I always backed off. I didn't want to hurt people.
Yeah, and just I'm wondering if we're thinking of the same person. During the CBC's Fifth Estate documentary, they interviewed someone who was said to be her ex-boyfriend or her boyfriend at the time, and he went on to become a police officer. Are we talking or thinking of the same person?
We're talking about the same man. He seemed, when I saw him that night, pleasant, middle-class, middle-aged man, not a greaser or a lowlife, believe me. He just looked like somebody I would have gone out with.
Just a regular guy.
Yeah, and his wife was a very attractive woman, obviously worried about him. She would look over her shoulder to see what he was doing, And I don't know if he just didn't like my version of events and he knew he couldn't say anything, or if it was for some other reason.
Something that's interesting to me, and I don't know if you went down this alley or if you have any memory of this, but I thought it was odd that in the CBC documentary, he was included in it, but the way the story went and the timeline goes is that Alexandra goes to mail some letters. When she doesn't come back before what would have been her shift at the hospital, but her boyfriend, that guy who went on to become a cop, he calls the house and asks her roommates, like, is Alexandra around? I want to offer her a ride to work. And they said no, like she didn't come back from mailing the letters, so we assume she's just going right to the hospital. And then the next morning when she's reported missing, the police go to talk to her boyfriend, but he actually left the town. He went camping or something with some of his friends.
Went up to Waskesiu. All Saskatchewan people know Waskesiu.
Yeah.
It was a long weekend, and the weather was incredibly good, and Alex was going to work all weekend.
Okay.
So she obviously wasn't going to go out with him.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's just when I'm hearing that story, I'm thinking, like, is it not like kind of unusual that or just an odd coincidence that the day she goes missing, or when this happens, he's calling. The next day he's out of town. That just struck me as odd. But they also make it clear in the CBC special that this guy wasn't like someone who was thought to be a suspect or anything like that. It's just as someone watching it, I'm thinking like it's just really weird that he was gone the next morning, like left town. But I guess you're right. It is a long weekend, and that would make sense.
Also, he wasn't the only guy, as nearly as I can figure out, who called that night.
Oh.
There was another one who wanted to arrange a double date and so on, but I don't know who those men were because the three roommates don't talk about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, couldn't bring myself to try, although I believe the nieces did. Anyway, I wanted to say something. And as far as I can figure out, he wasn't her boyfriend. She didn't have a boyfriend. Yeah, she was dating more than one guy. She was a free spirit, and she was only 23.
Yeah.
Although at that time we married young.
Yeah. Are the roommates still alive? Do you know?
Oh, as far as I know, they all are.
Mm.
But I can't, I can't really remember. One I couldn't find at all because she had married, and I called the nursing and changed her name, of course.
Yeah.
I phoned the nursing association, and they wouldn't give me any information. Another one had moved into the United States to live, and I can't remember the details of that, but she seemed the one who was the most troubled, which made me think she was the one who knew the most, but I didn't try to find her. Other people did, because she was very troubled.
Yeah, that's her. I can only imagine. Mm.
Third one, I can't remember what was with the third one. I couldn't talk to her anyway. I think they're probably the ones who knew the truth, but they seem to have been all scared into keeping their mouths shut no matter what they knew. You wouldn't think that would be possible.
Yeah, especially after all this time. I could see being scared off for a couple of years and not wanting to come forward, but 40, 50 years later, it seems like what harm would there be to just say it now?
Yeah, right. Well, that's the only way, that or we get a deathbed confession. That's all I can see is the possibility, and since it's 60 years later and men die younger than women, it's probably not likely the killer is even alive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one I put my finger on is dead.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Nighttime. If you're interested in reading Sharon's book, The Girl in Saskatoon, you can get it on paperback or as an ebook on Amazon right now. I've added links to it in this episode's description. Now, with that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, let me end with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Sharon Butala for sharing an evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. Sharon, your way with words is remarkable, and I can't help but say I only hope to be half as articulate as you when I'm nearing my 85th birthday. Heck, I'm asking for it for my 45th birthday. Now, a big thanks to Monty Data, who contributes the music for this series, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides our intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Kimberly, Barbara, and Beth, we appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money will fund the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to submit a question or comment to be aired in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. We look forward to hearing from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.